Would you ask Mr. Hayward to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Hayward, all ready to keep going?
I'm indeed, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, we were in the middle of examining the process of uploading training information onto the STEP system. I'd like to return to that next, please. LFB 0055191, your first statement, please, page 23, paragraph 67. Now, here you refer to the recommendation made by Station Manager Kelly, paragraph 50, which we saw, the second bullet point on that page. And you say this: implement adequate training, planning and recording systems. Following SM Kelly's report in 2010, this was partially achieved with a manual process implemented to update STEP on a monthly basis. From my recollection, Control were reliant on ICT to make changes to the systems to enable us to access the full functionality. This was not considered a priority at the time, as STARS was being updated for the operational shift change, among other changes, and our requirements were further down the line. The fact that we could partially update STEP manually went some way to addressing the shortfall. STARS did not recognise our short shift pattern. The station diary that feeds STEP was not configured for Control and was heavily operationally weighted. I believe this partial implementation started in 2015. Now, we've covered quite a bit of this this morning already, Mr. Hayward. But first, I think STARS, you weren't, I think, able to identify it, but it's, am I right, Staff Attendance Recording System?
Something like that, yes.
What was the full functionality the Control wanted to access that you could not achieve?
So we wanted to be able to allocate a course to a control officer using this system, and then that way they get it to their email. They know they've got the course that day. It's automatically recorded in the system, so we can see that they have attended or been offered the course, and then obviously attended it afterwards, because there's a process afterwards where it records that they attended the training.
Right, and that function records the notification and the attendance and updates automatically.
From my understanding, yes, it does.
And when you say further down the line in the sentence about halfway down, our requirements were further down the line, do you mean in time terms or in priority?
In priorities.
In priority?
Yes, there was an operational change that needed doing, which took priority over other work.
Right.
It wasn't just Control, I don't think, but there were other work.
So can we take it from your evidence you gave before the lunch break, but also from what you say here, that the reason Control could not have or did not have full access to STEP for its continued training programme was not because of any technical hurdle particularly or alone, but because of priorities, a question of prioritising when that work would be done?
Yes, but there were technical issues as well, of course, because the system needed recoding to recognise control shift pattern, for example.
Yes. And you say there were other priorities. Why wasn't it considered a priority by you or those to whom you were answerable, that Control access to that functionality?
Well, I think it was, but the other priorities went over the top. So it was a priority. We needed it doing, but other things needed doing first before we could have it. We could get the update to it. Right. And updates weren't regular. It had to go to STARS, who owned the system, and they had to plan that in for their changes and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's quite as straightforward as us just going in there and saying, can you change that for tomorrow, please? It takes to go through a process.
Right.
From my understanding.
Did anybody ever think to themselves, well, these control room officers are frontline responders. They're first responders in the event of certainly in the event of a fire survival guidance call. They are the absolute priority. Yes,
but there were. I don't know what those priorities were, so I can't comment on why we were prioritised over someone else. That's what I was told.
Right. Doing the best you can you think of any priority greater than a control room officer giving accurate fire survival guidance to a caller who needs it?
I don't know. I can't.
In the last sentence in that paragraph there, you say, I believe this partial implementation started in 2015. Why only in 2015?
Because so we could manually upload onto STEP before that time, but I believe they did a manual change for STEP to see to recognise our shift pattern, but the short shift pattern. So we could allocate training on the short shift. So that there was a small change to be able to affect that.
Why did that only happen? Why was the partial implementation only in 2015? I'm not sure you've answered my question.
Because that's as soon as that they could do that change.
Why?
I don't know.
I don't know. Do you know when, if ever, the implementation was finished?
No, I don't. It wasn't finished when I'd left.
Right. Can we go to LFB 000-51294, please? This is an email on the 22nd of July 2014, so we're now in the middle of 2014, and here is an email from you to Vic Bagnall, Keith Diamond, that's Som Diamond, I think, and Tajinder Ajimal. You see that?
Yes.
Now, Tajinder Ajimal is who, please?
He was a station manager, and he was responsible for resource management.
Right. Okay. Now, you say in the first paragraph, having reviewed our transfer of RMC, is that resource management?
It is indeed.
To Merton, the clearest concern that has been raised is the recording of training. We still do not have a robust set of records to refer to when training staff or the recording mechanisms to show what training has taken place. And then in the next sentence you say, this is not only control but RMC as well. And in the next paragraph you say, we have had goes at this before, but it has always fallen by the wayside. And then 2 paragraphs down you say, each member of staff should have a training record. It would be good to be able to access that record to identify training done, yet to be achieved, and future training over the year. Also, for any of us to access any record to see where staff are and any shortfalls identified. It is to be used regularly by staff training, and onus should be placed upon the staff to ensure all events are recorded. Whilst the focus should be on the newest training, it should reflect all training, FSGs, etc. Training records have never been our strong suit, and this has highlighted it significantly. It has to change, and quickly, and so I would like to prioritise, you go on to say in the next paragraph, it has to change and quickly, so I would like to prioritise this and deliver a draft plan by mid-September for an implementation at the beginning of October at the latest. And then in the last paragraph, you say, I do not think we need to start from scratch as we started to do the work, certainly in the control arena, but I think we need to satisfy ourselves and the staff that our training in these disciplines are considered, planned and delivered to a measured outcome. Now, I've read to you quite a bit of that, much of which I would suggest is self-explanatory, Mr. Hayward. But first, did your concerns and proposals as expressed in this message include training of CROs on FSG calls?
It was all training.
Right. And why was there still, as at mid-July 2014, no, quotes, robust set of records, quotes, for training, even at this point, notwithstanding the national guidance, the experience of Lacknell House, and all the things that we've discussed this morning? So
we were manually recording training still, as already explained. The OST would record the training, but because we had additional training now, we had resource management training as well as the Fire Rescue Service National Coordination Centre training. It was trying to get all these in place to ensure we knew that staff were trained in those particular disciplines. So it was to highlight to those officers that we needed to make sure that all training was recorded robustly to ensure that everybody received their resource management or all the additional training as well as control.
And you say, as I read to you, that you've had goes at this before, but it has always fallen by the wayside. Had it always fallen by the wayside because there was always some more important priority?
No, it fallen by the wayside in the fact that we have partial fixes, and in this case with the control training it was STEP, so we had the partial fix where we could send the information over and it could be uploaded. And now we've got additional training now, which was an ongoing training plan to train all staff in new functionality. And at this time as well, it was vision training as well. So we needed, and we weren't recording all that training at that time. We didn't know where staff were in their training, hence the email.
Yes. And what did you mean when you say training records have never been our strong suit?
The fact that our training spreadsheet is a manual spreadsheet, and it's subject to failure at certain points depending on whether it's filled in or not, and we know we haven't got the checks and balances because all you're manually putting it in, but you can't cross-reference it because it is only a spreadsheet.
Now, looking at the first sentence of this email, we need to scroll back up to it if we can, please. You say, by way of an introduction, having reviewed our transfer to RMC to Merton, the clearest concern that has been raised is the recording of training. Who was it who raised that concern?
I believe that was the operations managers, because we were releasing control staff to go and train on the resource management, and they raised the issue that they didn't know at what point the staff were, because it wasn't a one day and they could do it. It was an ongoing training package. And they just wanted a clearer picture on where people were and at what stage they were at. I think there was 3 phases to resource management.
Right. Why did it take the transfer of RMC to Merton for them to realise or raise with you that there had been it was an ongoing problem with recording of training?
It was that was specific to RMC, not other training. It was just I raised it as a general training issue.
Oh, I see. I follow. Now, when you say you wanted something at the beginning of October, was it that you wanted implemented?
I'd like to see a more robust a training plan.
In what form?
A spreadsheet. That's all we could deliver.
Right, but why wasn't there one of those at least? Never mind about whether you could upload or fix training as it went along onto the STEP system, which was a mechanical problem about keeping a record. Why could you nonetheless not have a continually updated manual paper spreadsheet?
There was an updated paper spreadsheet of training for control. The RMC, there was one, but Mr. Ajimol kept it in-house. It wasn't shared.
Why wasn't it shared?
Well, because he was doing training for resource management, and in those early stages, they went up into a separate room to do the training. So he kept it upstairs, and no one had asked for it at that point until we got to here.
That's RMC though. That's not.
Yes.
That's not what control room officers, crows, do, is it?
But they did start doing that, yes.
Right, but I'm really talking about the kinds of topics of training that had been raised by the 34 actions after the Lacknell House fire.
So at this time there would have been a training plan because, of course, it was vision training.
By this time, the vision training had taken place, or had been installed.
It was ongoing training.
So what was it that you wanted implemented by October 2014 that wasn't there before?
A training plan.
And why wasn't there a training plan before?
A more robust training. There was a training plan, but to include resource management, FRSNCC, vision training, and other control training.
Now, if we go then back to AC George's review of Brigade Control in July 2016 at LFB 000-32826, please, page 11, paragraph 47. We looked at this before. I just want to go back again to it. And I've read it to you this morning. I won't reread it. Is it fair to say that the issue that you raised in the July 2014 email that we've just looked at, Mr. Hayward, had still not been satisfactorily addressed some 2 years later? Hence the conclusion here by AC George.
And what paragraph are we looking at here?
47.
47.
Would you like me to read it out?
No, I can see it here, thank you.
Yes, we looked at it before.
Okay, so when you look at this in context to the actual document that was this engagement document, or the route and branch review, this developed in role was about other training, so about things like leadership courses and non-control specific courses, because we couldn't release them to go and do those because of the staffing issue. So this was really about in this instance, this was about or other training, not necessarily control.
Why do you say that?
Because that was what was raised as a point that come out of the report.
Well, this part of this paragraph 47, sits in part of the report dealing with development in role, as you can see at the top of the screen. And this is all about the control room, isn't it? I mean, the report itself is called Review of Brigade Control.
It is, but the staff were concerned about, because they get, as I said before, they get they do a control officer course, a 9-week course. They go through their probation and then they become a control officer. From then on, their promotion is just an assessment process. There's no real development, as in a development book, which was obviously being addressed later on, later on in the years. So at this stage, we did introduce an AOM package to address some of that, but this was really about other courses as well. So not specifically control type courses, but other courses that other staff go on, mental health or first aid or courses like that. So it included those courses as well.
I can see that it might have included those courses, but the point being made in paragraph 47 related to training generally, isn't it? It doesn't specifically identify.
Developing in role, yes.
Yes. And therefore I ask my question again, is it fair to say that the issue you raised in your July 2014 email had still not satisfactorily been addressed some 2 years later when AC George came to issue this report?
Well, no, because I think training was delivered, but training was focused over this period to things like vision, or and that was the main focus of training around that time. Certainly, when this report was done, that was all there was. So you can understand that staff were unhappy that there was no other courses available to them at that point. But at that point, that was the priority.
The point being made in paragraph 47, I'd invite you to accept, is that sometimes individuals' training was not recorded on their training records properly, and that there was no robust planning. That's the point being made here.
I would agree with that.
Yes, and given that was the case in July 2016, is it fair to say that the issue that you had raised in your July 2014 email we've just looked at had not been addressed by that time?
Not satisfactorily.
Thank you. And why is that?
Because the priorities took over.
Right. And then if we go over the page, we saw this again earlier, page 12, paragraph 49C in the third line, where the recommendation is for all training to be recorded on an individual's ITR, etc. We read that before. Just take a moment to look at it again. Can we take it from that by July, or even as late as July 2016, controls still hadn't been provided with full access to STEP such that the training records would be automatically updated?
I believe that's the case, yes.
And now we're at 2016. Why is that?
Because the system hadn't been configured to allow control. I believe in 2015 it could recognise the short shift as a whole, but not in two parts. So we had a partial functionality, but not the whole thing.
Right. Did you ever get, as you put it, the whole thing before the 14th of June 2017?
No.
Did you do any work as POM at this point to make sure that you did get the whole thing?
Yeah, I raised it with AC George at the time, and raised again about outsourcing training to allow a more robust training system and not to mark our own homework, as it were.
And what did he say?
We had a meeting with a training manager. They said that they have to wait until the Babcock contract comes up again, and they couldn't just introduce us into Babcock at that point.
The Babcock contract wouldn't come up again for many, many years, would it?
I wasn't aware of when the contract was due for review.
Right. So what else did you do, if anything, after that point to make sure that you got full training records being automatically updated into the steps?
Or we could continue to make sure training was recorded If it was had to be recorded manually, it was done, and of course we had that partial access, so it would be recorded. It would recognise the short shifts, but it wouldn't do any of the other stuff. It wouldn't tell someone on a course or anything like that at that point.
I'm now going to move on to ask you some questions about the Lacknell House action points, by which I mean some of the 34 action points that the Brigade had identified between the fire in July 2009 and the date of the inquest in January 2013. Yes?
Yes.
Now, do you remember first that the Lacknell House Board was a body established by the Brigade in October 2009?
Yes.
Yes. And is it right that the purpose of the Lacknell House Board was to supervise, if you like, all aspects of the Lacknell investigation done by the Brigade and related issues, so as to be able better to understand the LFB's response to the fire, the Lacknell House fire?
I believe it was.
And also to ensure that appropriate action was taken in a timely manner to deal with those issues?
I believe it was, yeah.
Now, we know that the Lacknell House Board was set up some 3.5 years before the inquest, and we have the 34-point plan. Was the purpose of that action plan to maintain a record of the actions identified and agreed, and to give clarity about who was responsible for what and the timescales in which they should be done?
I believe that's the case, yeah.
And is it also right that the individual actions were assigned to a lead officer?
Yes.
And in respect of control-related actions, that lead officer was A.C. Brown, was it not?
Correct.
Now, in your statement, your first statement, if we can go to that, please, at page 6, paragraph 20, you say this. I was allocated a number of tasks by the board to implement changes within control. These developed into actions that were then monitored by the board. An actions log is attached to the minutes of each board meeting from 15th September 2010. And then you then go on to list the actions that were assigned to you in paragraph 20 on this page and the following pages. And in summary, am I right that those were actions 5, 7 through to 13, and 16, 17, and 18?
I believe so. I don't remember off the top of my head, but
right. Well, I've summarised that from your statement.
Okay.
Do you know why those actions were assigned to you in particular?
Because they were control specific.
And what did that assignment mean in terms of your involvement?
Just to make sure that the actions were completed.
Right. Did that mean that you took overall responsibility for them?
To deliver them, yes.
To deliver them?
Well, to ensure that they were completed, yes.
Yes. So did you have to did you see yourself as having to be involved in the actual delivery?
Yes.
You did. Now, as I've said, there was an inquest into the 6 fatalities at Lacknell House, and that started in January 2013, after which you may recall that the coroner made a number of recommendations in what was then known as a Rule 43 report.
Yes.
And some of those were directed at the London Fire Brigade, weren't they?
They were.
And some of those, there were some recommendations that she didn't make because of the work that she had been told the Brigade had already done. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And that included, is this right, guidance as to the handling of fire survival guidance calls and training for officers dealing with such calls?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I'd want to ask you some questions about the specific action points identified by the LFB before the Lacknell House inquest, which are referred to in a document produced by the Brigade in August 2018, so after this inquiry had been gathering evidence for some weeks in Phase 1. And the document is called the Lacknell Assurance Review. Can we look at that? That is LFB 404801. And I think this is a document that was produced while you were still at the LFB.
Yes.
And we can see the date at the foot of the page, foot of the screen, 7th of August 2018. If we can use paragraph 20 of your first witness statement as the anchor point to summarise each of the pre-inquest actions. Let's start then, please, with point 5, pre-inquest action 5 and the gap analysis. And can we turn to page 12 in this document first? Here we have bottom right-hand corner, action 5, undertake a gap analysis of national and brigade fire survival guidance policies and guidance in order to produce a report identifying where brigade control fire survival guidance policy differs from the national guidance. And then the report goes on to say, a gap analysis of the national control guidance and brigade fire survival guidance policies was completed. And there's a footnote 5. The gap analysis specifically compared Fire Service Circular 10/1993, training of fire control staff, and the accompanying fire control personnel training package, Keeping People Safe 1994, with Brigade Policy 539, Emergency Call Management, September 2007 version, and Fire Survival Guidance Training Materials. Now, what was it that instigated that particular gap analysis?
During the setting up the board, we wanted to identify, because it was referenced, I think 1093 was referenced somewhere, and we didn't actually hold a copy at the time. So we wanted to check our training was matching the guidance that was provided by government.
What was it about the fire, the Lakenhall House fire, that led people within the brigade, such as you, to think there might be such a gap which required investigation?
The fact how some of the calls were dealt with.
How some of the calls were dealt with, and was that...
Yeah, advice given. We just wanted to reassure that the advice that was given was what the training was, the national guidance was telling us.
Right. So, did somebody analyse the calls after the fire?
Yes.
Who was that?
Operational support team and Joanne Smith, I believe. And Lindsay Turner.
And was there a report that was made to you or anybody to your knowledge?
No, I don't recall why the gap analysis took place. It may have been DAC Tim Cutbill was lead investigator at the time. May have raised it because there was obviously other documentation that supported that, which was the pamphlets for where the stay put advice come from.
Yes. Now, if you go back to your first witness statement, please, paragraph 20, first bullet point, you say there that you conducted the gap analysis with SOM Joanne Smith, DAC Tim Cutbill, and Tom Davis from the LFB's General Counsel's Department. That's right, is it?
That's correct.
Right. And in your second witness statement, if we go to that, LFB 000862213, page 2, paragraph 10, you say, SOM Smith and I carried out the initial gap analysis by comparing National Guidance Fire Service Circular 1093, Annex B, FSG Training Package, the National Guidance, with LFB internal documentation, including Policy 539 and the Control FSG PowerPoint, you say. And you also say that you considered the Reference Information File, or RIF. Could you just help me? What was each person's role in conducting the gap analysis?
So I was there because I was the Principal Operations Manager, or the Principal Controller at the time. Joanne Smith was on there because of her control background knowledge. And Lindsay Turner was involved in the incident. DAC Cutbill was the operational lead for Lakenhall, and Mr. Davis was counsel, so from a legal perspective.
Right. And what was the purpose of the gap analysis? What did you hope to achieve from it?
Well, just to identify whether there was any gaps in our training package with reference to national guidance.
And why would that be a problem?
Because if there was a gap, we needed to address that gap and improve the training.
Right. So does it come to this, that the purpose of the gap analysis was to find any gap that existed and then work to fill it?
Yes.
Right. Then let's look at LFB 00104168. This is and you need to scroll, look at the second email on the page from Dave Brown, AC Brown to you, 29th November 2009. And it says, Scott, we spoke briefly last week with regards to the Lakenhall report and how it was progressing. Unfortunately, I don't think it's ready to be presented to the board on 2nd December, though I would still like you to attend and give a verbal update. Lindsay is obviously doing some good work in gathering the relevant information, and I'm sure this will continue. However, I think it more prudent for you to take a greater role in overseeing all the various strands of Brigade Control's involvement, i.e. the report, gap analysis, staff statements, etc. Up to that point, what role had you played in Lacanal?
So originally, after the incident, AC Brown asked Lindsay Turner because she was there on the incident, to start writing the report. And obviously she wrote the report, but she wrote a version of a report, sent to Dave Brown. Dave Brown wasn't happy with the report and wanted more to it. So I think it was because obviously we were not trained necessarily or had written reports of that style before. So Lindsay had tried to write the report, and it needed to be more in depth. There needed to be more to it. So then I got on board and started writing a report as well.
Right. What further depth or greater depth could you bring to it as POM, greater than Lindsay Turner's?
I think it was the fact that I think Lindsay's initial report, and I don't remember perfectly what it was, but it was around 4 or 5 pages, just about the incident itself. There was no context around the control, the shift pattern at the time, where control were, what they were doing, how many calls were taken, what other calls were being taken on that during that incident. So it just needed a lot more detail added to it, and obviously I could assist in that.
And do you know why AC Brown considered it more prudent, as his words, more prudent for you to take a greater role?
No, I don't.
And why in relation to the gap analysis specifically, among other things?
I don't know. I can't answer.
Scrolling down to page 2, if we can, the email continues. If we look at the first paragraph, as follows: I also understand that the gap analysis needs some further work in terms of detailing how the history needs to be listed chronologically, more details of how our policy arose from it, and the training that is ensued. Again, though, I've asked that the Lacanal team to work closely with you on this. Now, he says that he understood that the gap analysis needed more work. Was it you who told him that during the conversation the previous week that he has identified at the start of this email?
No, not that I'm aware of. I think what he's talking, the chronology there was talking about, they wanted to go back to 1993, and how fire survival guidance calls came about, and how 1093 fell out from that, and where control was at that point.
Oh, I see. So he wanted. Is this right, from what you've just told me, that he didn't just want a gap analysis, he wanted to identify when in the history the divergence first occurred and why? Yes,
so going back to the Shirley, there was an incident in the West Midlands in 91, I believe, and then 1093 came out on the back of that, and control staff were trained in 94.
And who were the Lacanal team that he's referred to in the last sentence of that paragraph?
Well, those that was part of the investigation, so a number of operational officers.
Right. Did you work closely with them?
At times, yes.
Right. Now, what happens next, it appears, is as follows. If you go to LFB 30-83135, you send an email to SOM Stibbards, or Joanne Stibbards, for which reads Smith, and you say this: Good morning, Joanne. I need you to review this gap analysis to ensure we are correct in what we are teaching against the guidance. Having looked through it, I believe we may have overlooked or fudged the comparison to fit London. I'm not saying we do it wrong, but if the report has any discrepancy, then it will not be credible. Would you please look at the training we do against what the original document proposed to see if there are changes? Sort of fits or nearly fits is not good enough. If the gap is there, we must highlight and explain why. Now, when you say we may have overlooked or fudged the comparison to fit London, what was that? What did you mean?
I don't recall exactly.
Did you get the impression that the draft you'd been given of the gap analysis thus far overlooked points of comparison?
Quite possibly. I don't recall exactly, and I know I asked Joanne to look at it because of her background, and she could see if there was anything that we weren't doing.
Yeah.
I don't exactly remember what was missing.
Is it fair to say that you wanted the gap to be identified clearly?
Yes, absolutely.
Without a fudge, without omission?
Yes, indeed.
So that you could address it properly?
Yes.
Right. Now then, let's then go to the action plan we see in September 2010. We move forward 10 months. LFB 55192. I'll show you the first page of this document. This is the minutes of the 15th of September 2010 Lacknell House Board meeting we looked at before. And if you go to page 7, please, in this, we can see that it has some minutes. And if you go on page 7 to item 5, undertake gap analysis of control national and London FSG policies. You see?
Yep.
And the lead officer there is ACSD. And could you just explain who that is?
That's AC Service Delivery, so that'd be Dave Brown.
Dave Brown. And then under update 07/4/10 completed. That's the 7th of April 2010, isn't it?
Yep.
So it looks as if the Lacknell House Board was being told in mid-September that the gap analysis had been completed some months before on the 7th of April that year, yes?
Yes.
2010. Was it completed before the first initial FSG training that took place in 2010? Do you remember?
I don't, but I would say yes.
Why would you say yes?
Because if we'd have identified, because we'd needed to identify the training, the gaps if there were any, and put into the training package.
Well, you might or might not have done.
Okay.
I mean, that wouldn't have been the case had the training taken place in February.
Okay.
But is it right that the gap analysis didn't consider Fire Service Circular 54/04?
We looked at 5404, which is a emergency call management document. There is elements there of fire survival guidance, but it's about using scripts, and London didn't use scripts at that point. Not until, and ProCAD couldn't use script, I don't believe, and it wasn't until Vision come in that there was SESH, which is the emergency call handling, structured emergency call handling.
Sorry, what did you call it? SESH?
SESH, structured emergency call handling.
SESH. SECH.
Yes, yeah, SESH we call it, but yeah.
Did you have any discussion with SOM Smith about whether to include 5404 in the gap analysis?
I believe it was discussed with AC Cutbill and DAC Cutbill and Mr. Davis, and it was felt it wasn't required.
Now, given that 5404 was extant national guidance at the time, why was the brigade content to leave that gap in place?
I'm not sure there was anything in 5404 which would have done anything to enhance the training from 1093.
But a decision was made nonetheless. It appears that
I believe so. I don't recall that far back, but yes, it wasn't in the gap analysis.
So that gap would not be closed.
Well, it wasn't considered. It wasn't considered at the time to be a gap in our training.
Well, it was a gap, wasn't it? Surely, because there was national guidance. It was still in existence. Your training didn't cater for it or cover it, so there was a gap. No.
Okay.
Well, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when we undertook the gap analysis, we considered there to be no gap with 5404, hence why it wasn't included.
Can we go to LFB 00107978, please? Now, if we go to the second page in this email chain, the topic is Policy 539, and noting the date. This is early 2010.
Yep.
Before, I should just tell you, before 539 was amended in September of 2010. So at that stage, you're still working on the 2007 version. That's just a bit of background. The chain itself is about PN 539, and it's between Jill Lightbourne, who was Policy and Procedures Review Officer, DC Dexter, and AC Brown. And if you go to the top of page 2, or rather the bottom of page 1, you can see that there's an email from Dave Brown to you of the 28th of February 2010. You can just about see it. You can't see it's to you.
No, I can't.
Go to
I
page
can't
2.
see that.
And you're right. We need to go to the top of page 2. It's to you. Scott, please note. So you're being forwarded the email chain below it. And if you go to the next email down, you can see that there's an email from Jill Lightbourne to Rita Dexter.
No, I haven't got that.
No,
yet.
if you go to the bottom of page 2, and then turn to page 3, you'll see that she is discussing the policy 539, owned by SD and mobilising with mobilising of the responsible work team. And you can see who she is. Now, if you then go up to the bottom of page 1 and top of page 2, you send this email chain on to SOM Turner and SOM Stibbards on the 4th of March. Now we need to get up bottom of page 1, top of page 2. You see that?
Yes.
And you say to them on the 4th of March, I think on the face of it, Jill is right in the fact that Policy 539 is a mixture of work that documents a history of what Control did and do. And then in the third paragraph, you say this. We have discussed changing the name of the ECM policy document as it has caused confusion during local investigations in relation to 5404 emergency call management. And what local investigations had taken place in relation to 5404? Do you remember?
I do not remember.
Do you know who carried them out?
I do not. I do remember this time, though. This is about splitting some elements of 539 out into separate policies, the likes of automatic fire alarms. It would be better placed in a mobilising policy, which is a separate policy. So it was about making 539 specifically about emergency call management, as opposed to a number of other elements just brought into it for control.
Right. Do you remember whether there was a decision or even a discussion at that time about excluding 5404 from either the gap analysis itself or the revisions to 539?
I don't remember it being excluded or a discussion about that. I just remember that it was about scripted calls, and it was about asking a caller whether the car had diesel or petrol or the like, which would obviously extend your call handling time, which we didn't have in London at the time, and it was considered it wasn't required. But that's all I remember about it. I don't remember any firm decisions being made.
We then go to January 2013 and the Lindridge review. We know that Group Manager Lindridge completed a review of the Latinal Action Plan in the last part of 2012 and in January 2013. And are you familiar with that review?
I remember it. I remember Mr. Lindridge doing it.
Yes. Now, if we look at that document, this is LFB 3085854. Here is the review, 4th of January 2013. And if we go to page 5 in this document, we can see that there is some text and some discussion between DC Dexter and AC Brown in the comments on the right-hand side. Obviously, this is a draft as at that date. And you can see the comments. If you look at the comment related to the first paragraph under the section Action 5, National Control Guidance versus LFB Control Policy Gap Analysis, you can see that the text says, the gap analysis did not include FSC 5404 as part of the national guidance for consideration. FSC 5404 introduced a 3-staged call handling approach and included additional FSG questions for assessing the caller. The gap analysis also identifies areas for improvement for the national guidance. These recommendations have not been addressed or reflected in local policy. And the question that is asked is why not? That's DC Dexter. Why was it not included? And AC Brown replies in the red text in the first comment bubble. FSC 5404 deals with emergency call management. Only part of it actually deals with FSG, and that is around age, gender, and mental/physical disability. Based on that, control concentrated purely on FSC 1093 and the training package. For completeness, though, I instructed Richard Chandler to remedy this in November. Scott is dealing in Richard's absence. Were you dealing with that in Richard Chandler's absence?
I don't recall. I just know that the 5404, the 3-stage approach or scripted, we didn't use.
Do you remember at all being asked by Dave Brown or perhaps Richard Chandler before he went on leave to fill the gap between the existing guidance and FSC 5404?
No, I don't believe. I'm not sure there was a gap really. Whilst it wasn't considered, well, it was considered, but it wasn't part of the analysis because it didn't impact on the training package, which is what we were measuring it against, from what I remember.
Indeed, but the view appears to have been taken by those more senior to you in the brigade, that nonetheless the gap should be closed for completeness. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen this document, and hence why it's. My answer is I don't know. If Dave asked me to look at it, I would have looked at it, but that may not necessarily have changed the outcome of the training package.
Right. At all events, I think you do accept or can accept that in the end, despite what's written here, FSC 5404 was not included in the gap analysis.
It was considered, but not included in the overall analysis.
Was the reason given in the Lindridge review the real reason why FSC 5404 was omitted from the gap analysis?
Could I see what he's put, please?
Well, it's on the page in front of you. It's in the comment column.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's more around this 3-stage call handling that we didn't use in London.
Now, yes, and you've said that a number of times. The question is really, why did the LFB think that it was acceptable not to use the national guidance? What was different about London?
I don't know. That was just the way we looked at it. We didn't dismiss it, but it didn't enhance or improve the analysis.
Was a view taken within the brigade that 5404 was no longer fit for purpose or applicable to any fire and rescue service, or was this just a London?
I can't answer. I don't know what the brigade felt overall.
Right. Can we then look at the gap analysis? This is at LFB 404750. there's the first page, and this is an annex to the November 2012 Lachinal Control Report. And if we go, please, to page 8, we can see the gap analysis itself. And the left-hand column there is entitled National Guidance, 1093 Appendix B, Fire Survival Guidance Training. From looking at the detail of that column, is it right to say that that includes both what is written in the Fire Service Circular 1093 and also the Fire Control Personnel Training Package Keeping People Safe, 1994? It doesn't say so, but...
No, I don't know.
You don't know. Right. Well, let's... you don't know. Let's just see if we can do this a slightly different way. If you look at item 1, top left, it says... do you see it says 1, introduction?
Yes.
Incident have occurred where fire control operators have been faced with a caller who is trapped by fire in domestic accommodation and in a distressed condition. Now, you could see that language. It's probably too small, but if that can be kept on the screen, and can we have at the same time, please, LFB 00118948. I'll show you the first page of that document, and I'd like then to go to page 5 in that document. There's the first page. Is that familiar to you? That?
Yes.
That is. That's the first page of the training note in the Home Office document, Keeping People Safe, published in 1994.
Yes.
If we go to page 5 and look at the left-hand column in the first paragraph, you can compare the language. Again, it says incidents have occurred, so there's no typo. Incidents have occurred where fire control operators have been faced with a caller who is trapped by fire in domestic accommodation and in a distressed condition. So, would you accept that taking the comparison on the screen, that the 1994 document, Keeping People Safe, was at least in part the source document for the gap analysis?
Yes.
Yes. And now we can take the right-hand document off the screen for the moment and continue with the gap analysis, please. Page 8, the second column from the left. If we just, thank you. If you look at the second column from the left, or rather the central column, that's entitled LFB Policy, Guidance and Training Notes. 1, Policy 539, Emergency Call Management, Appendix 1. 2, Control Training PowerPoint, FSG. 3, Control Trainee Handout, FSG. Does that column set out the detail from all of those sources?
Yes.
And in relation to Policy 539, let's just see if we can get that on the screen. Is that LFB 00118944? Sorry, you could answer the question by reference to the document, not a recollection of the number. There it is. You see it?
Yes.
Is that's Policy 539 that you're talking about here? Right.
Yes.
And that's the version issued in 14th November 2007. If we take that off the screen and go back to the PowerPoint, item 2, Control Training PowerPoint FSG, if you go to LFB 00061943, and that's the first page of it, and scroll down 1 or 2 slides in, was that the PowerPoint referred to? Aim, objectives, fire situations. The next slide. Do you remember?
Yeah, can you scroll down a few more, please?
Yes. Proactive questions. We'll get through this together. Help me to help you, etc.
Yeah, it looks familiar.
Right. And then if we go to LFB 00083476, was this item 3, the control trainee handout? We'll just wait for it to come up. There, and perhaps scroll down through it. Those are the contents. So section 1, introduction to survival guidance training package, etc.
Could you scroll down a little bit on that?
Yes,
so I could
of
see
course.
some of them?
If you go to the next page, there's an introduction, aim and objectives, and then page 3, there's survival guidance techniques.
Yes.
So that's that document. I just wanted to make sure that we've identified the documents that the gap analysis refers to. Thank you. And then let's go back to the gap analysis, please, and look at the third column from the left. So back, please, to LFB 404750, page 8. And look at the third column from the left there, gap analysis, comparison of national guidance against LFB policy, guidance and training. And then there are some findings set out in those columns. Below that on each of the successive pages. Were those your findings?
Between me, Joanne Smith, DAC Cutbill, and Tom Davis.
Tom Davis, yeah. Now, the final column is recommendations there. And did the Lakenhall House Board see and approve those recommendations?
I believe they did. This was submitted to the board and accepted.
Right. We have some minutes of those meetings in April and May 2010 where the gap analysis was discussed, but it's not clear from those minutes that these recommendations were actually specifically approved. But your recollection is that they were.
Yeah, they were submitted and accepted. Yeah.
Submitted and accepted. Thank you. Now, if we then go to page 9 in this document, you can see there's a row that deals with call handling techniques. Paragraph 2, underneath FSC 1093 Appendix B, do you see it says call handling techniques?
Yes, I do.
And the text of the gap analysis comment says this, in the third column, both 1093 national guidance and local training handout acknowledge two techniques to use to extract information from callers. Both pieces of literature only supply a brief description of the technique and fail to give examples. LFB control training handout differs slightly from 1093 national guidance, which focuses on the likelihood of using the proactive technique to obtain incident details, whereas 1093 national guidance recommends adopting a fully proactive technique to take control of the situation. And it goes on. The training PowerPoint slide 5 offers examples of proactive questions for LFB control officers to use during these situations. However, on review, these can be developed further to enhance better understanding. Now, was it considered, therefore, during this analysis that the training in relation to call handling techniques was not fulfilling what was required fully to prepare control room officers?
No, I think the idea of the analysis was to see where, there was an extant document, and I wanted to know whether that extant document, or we were following that extant document. And in some, although we were, in most cases, there was some enhancements required to make it better.
And we can see the correlating and recommendations column on, if we go back to page 9, in relation to this issue. It says this: the recommendation is that consideration be given to updating national guidance in FSC 1093 and FSC 5404 to include further information on the various techniques that may be required to be used by fire control operators to extract information from callers regarding their situation. Information relating to those techniques and how they are currently utilised in fire control rooms should be sought, and consideration should be given to ascertain the benefits of fire control operators varying these techniques whilst talking to the caller, instead of just adopting one approach as 1093 guidance implies. Rewrite proactive question example slide on training PowerPoint is required. And then it goes on. Although both National Guidance 1093 and training PowerPoint cover the assessment of the caller, no additional training is provided on how to change to questioning techniques or different styles of questioning for the fire control operator to use if a caller is having problems communicating. Why did the gap analysis make suggestions in relation to the national guidance documents?
Because it was an older document.
And was the idea that the national guidance documents themselves should be updated and improved?
Yes.
How could the LFB do that single-handedly, or was the idea that the LFB would lead a national initiative?
Well, a part of one of the outcomes was to provide a letter to, I believe it was DCLG, it could have been CFOA, asking that we consider their improvements or updating of the extant documents, and that London will be happy to assist in helping with that.
Well, we'll see what happens to that suggestion later in your evidence. But I think you and I agree on one thing, I think, is it was the purpose of the gap analysis not only to examine the LFB's own procedures, but to critique the national guidance documents as documents. Yes. Now, let's look at the gap analysis and what it doesn't do. And the first topic is, and I'm going to suggest to you that it doesn't include a warning about the dangers of offering reassurance to callers. As a general proposition, do you accept that the gap analysis doesn't do that?
It doesn't offer the warning up, no.
Let's look at the detail. If we go to page 11 in this document, please, in the third column, entitled Gap Analysis, Comparison of National Guidance Against LFB Policy Guidance and Training, it says that the gap between national guidance and the LFB policy on that was as follows. National Guidance 1093 acknowledges the possibility that an emotional bond may be formed between control operator and caller as the call progresses. However, emphasis, I think that should say, is given to the fact that this relationship may be adverse and lead to the caller providing answers that they believe will be the desired response, and caution should be used when offering reassurance in case this leads to a false sense of security. LFB training package tends to encourage a strong attachment between caller and fire control operator and reiterates the use of reassuring phrases which may be construed as offering a false sense of security. You see that?
Yes.
Now, if we go to the first column on page 11, looking across to the left, it says, attempt should be made to reassure the caller without promoting a false sense of security. That's the national guidance. Just pausing there, do you agree that the training package in place before the Lacknell House fire did encourage the control room operator to create a strong attachment with the caller?
I do.
That was the problem. And if you look at the second column of the gap analysis, then, it doesn't, would you agree with me that it doesn't specify whether or not the policy, PN 539, addresses the need for caution when offering reassurance to callers to avoid promoting a false sense of security?
Sorry, can you just clarify what point am I looking at our notes now? The
Yes,
second column.
The second column on page 11. Yes, there's no point made there about whether or not the policy 539, which is the first of the three things being looked at, addresses the need for caution when offering reassurance to callers so as to avoid creating a false sense of security.
Agreed, it doesn't.
Yeah. Nor in the third column is there any mention of a gap in that respect in the policy.
No.
Yes. Only a gap between the guidance and the training.
Yes.
Yes. Would you agree with me? And we can go to the November 2007 version of PN 539 if you like. But would you agree with me that the FSG guidance in the 2007 version of Policy 539 doesn't include a warning akin to what you see in the national guidance?
No, I agree.
Yes. And do you agree that that should have been identified in the gap analysis?
It was identified as such in the fact that whilst the warning wasn't there, the idea was to promote people away from the bonding and more to assess. So it was identified, but not explicitly the way you've explained it there.
Yes. And then if you look at the recommendation in the last column of the gap analysis there, in the fourth line, do you see it says place? Place the LFB training guidance on call psychology more into context with 1093 national guidance to ensure, although the fire control operator adopts aspects of reassurance such as exchanging names, other suggested phrases used during training do not allow the emotional link to be formed, and advice is given is proactive and supportive without providing false reassurance. My question is this: was the intention that the policy 539 should be amended specifically to say that CROs should not form an emotional link with callers and should be careful not to provide false assurances?
I think Policy 539 should indicate that reassurance is accepted and will happen during a call like that. But So I think there is a place for it. I just think that our policies weigh too heavily on that and not on assess.
It's really the point about the gap, that the gap was identified between the national guidance and the training on this point, but not between national guidance and the policy, which the training was training off. That's what I'm putting to you.
Then no, it wasn't.
No. Now, if we look at Fire Service Circular 1093 again, look back at it, LFB 403617, and look at page 1, paragraph 2, in the last sentence. The author says this: additionally, in circumstances such as these, a fire control operator may need to take into account that the normal procedure of calming the caller may not be appropriate and may even be dangerous in some circumstances.
I'm sorry, I'm not on that page at the moment, I don't think.
You are.
Have you not got the letter up from the chief executive county councils?
What paragraph is that?
Second
sorry?
paragraph.
Second
paragraph
paragraph.
2.
Okay. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll read it to you again. The last sentence says, additionally, in circumstances such as these, a fire control operator may need to take into account that the normal procedure of calming the caller may not be appropriate and may even be dangerous in some circumstances. And would you agree that that was a clear warning about the dangers of offering false reassurance set out in 1993 in this circular that was not included in the 2007 version of Policy 539?
Yes, I would agree.
Yes, and nor in the gap analysis.
Yes, but it was yes.
Yes.
As it stands there.
Yes, and can you explain why your gap analysis did not identify that gap?
I think we did identify the gap, but identified it in a different way, where we want to move the control officer away from the bonding and more into reassess. So although it wasn't explicit as you've explained it there, it was identified, and hence why the training changed to look at reassess as an ongoing thing rather than talking to them and keeping them where they are.
Now, the next topic I want to look at with you in the gap analysis is the question of the need for continual reassessment by the call handler. Can we please go to the control report annexures, year's LFB 404750, page 14. This is the gap analysis, again, at page 14, fourth column. And this is against the national guidance in the first column, Appendix B to the circular, smoke. You see that?
Yes.
And the recommendations column says in the third paragraph, it's not numbered, but it's after the second indent, National Guidance 1093 highlights the possible effects of smoke on callers, but fails to offer the fire control operator any practical suggestions to deal with these possible changes. Any updates to 1093 National Guidance needs to provide a suggestion that fire control operators should continually reassess the situation, not only to remain aware of changing conditions within the premises, but also the state of mind of the caller. And then, if you look ahead to page 17, there's a further recommendation along the same lines, again in the fourth column. National Guidance 1093 and LFB training materials recognise the importance of initial assessment as the first stage of an FSG call. However, both documents do not convincingly explain the benefits of continual assessment or possible reassessment further into the call to ensure the situation or individual circumstances has not or is not changing. Now, that's not so much a gap, is it, as a criticism of the national standards?
I just think as time's gone by, situations have changed, and I just think it was a suggestion again, which is part of the update in that document, and that was the offer, to update the document. I just think it's a learning from what we learned and what we wanted to share.
So, in fact, you're looking at two things. First of all, the gap between LFB policy and training on the one hand and the national guidance on the other, and secondly, the defects as they have now come to be seen in the national guidance itself.
Yes.
Now, looking at this recommendation, you can see that it doesn't specifically address the 2007 version of Policy 539, emergency call handling specifically, but would you agree that that version, again, did not ask the control room operator to continually assess or reassess the situation?
I'd agree with that.
Do you know why that recommendation focused on amending the National Guidance 1093 and the LFB training material, but again, not the policy itself, not the LFB policy itself?
I don't recall.
Did you actually intend that policy number 539 be amended in light of this recommendation?
Yes.
You did. Do you know why that wasn't spelt out in this document?
No.
Can I then turn to a further topic, which is lack of consolidation? Can you look at page 8 in the gap analysis, please? Back at page 8. And look at the third column, where, and this is in relation to the first topic we looked at before, no issues identified. However, the information is found in a number of LFB documents and needs to be consolidated. And if we look at the Lindridge review in January 2013, so some 3 years later, this is at LFB 3033943, page 1. There's the review. Page 6 is where I want to go, action 10. There it is, top of the screen. Revision of PN 539 emergency call handling. This is 3 years later. Group Manager Lindridge comments on that policy, and he says in the second paragraph, one recommendation of the control gap analysis action 5 stated the information is found in a number of LFB documents and needs to be consolidated, but the structure of Brigade policy notes appear to be unchanged from pre-2009. Now, he's quoting there directly from the gap analysis, page 8 we've just seen, Mr. Hayward, isn't he?
Yes.
But he then goes on to say no change in the last 4 years. And if we go on to page 12, under action reference 10, and this is in the schedule to this document, he says there, expected outcome, ensure policy 539 complies with national guidance. And then under the review process findings, he says in the second paragraph, PN 539 does not contain the complete detail on the LFB's FSG arrangements and needs to be read in conjunction with the training documents and the control reference information files, RIFs. While it could be argued that PN 539 does not contain all of the information in the national guidance, it should be noted that the format of the national guidance, the detail is in the form of a training package, does not lend itself to a methodical approach. Now, do you know why it was that the recommendation made in the gap analysis on page 8 that there should be consolidation had not been actioned by the time Group Manager Lindridge conducted his review in January 2013, almost 3 years later?
I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure what consolidation was required. If you're suggesting that that 1093 should have been mimicked in PN 539, then that wasn't the idea. I don't think. The idea that the policy note and the FSG element is an annex or an appendix to policy 539, which is about emergency call handling, but the reference documents are the reference information files and training documentation.
Did anybody do a check or audit to make sure that the recommendations in the gap analysis were carried fully into effect?
Yes, we would have done as control, yes.
You would have done as control? Well, was there one?
I don't recall, but I would suggest there was, yes.
You would suggest there was, but what's the basis for that suggestion?
I mean, we're talking about. I'm not quite sure what Mr. Lindridge was saying or not saying here. He's saying that I don't know what he's suggesting, so I can't really answer the question.
Right. I mean, what he's suggesting, I would suggest to you, is that the principles of emergency call handling don't fully reflect the national guidance, partly because 539 doesn't contain all the information in the national guidance, which can be found elsewhere. And
Yes.
it's all scattered around different documents and needs to be pulled together.
Well, it's scattered around the documents which control staff will use if an incident was to occur. The 539 is a policy reference document which is for use by everybody, but for an actual incident, they would go to the reference information file to be able to follow that through. So I don't think the information is scattered. I just think it's put in an appropriate place for a control officer, if the incident occurred, could pick up there and then, not refer to a policy document which would be quite wieldy to get to an appendix where that FSG information would be.
Well, let's just break it down then. For looking at what's on the screen, do you agree with the first sentence of what Group Manager Lindridge says there, namely that Policy 539 doesn't contain the complete detail on FSG call handling, and you need to read it together with the training documents and the RIFs?
Yes.
Yes. Do you agree with him that the format of the national guidance itself doesn't lend itself to a methodical approach?
I'm not sure what he means by the format and the national guidance. I mean, it's been reformatted since 1993 because it's an old format.
Yeah, yes. And do you agree with him that whatever the format was, it's a letter and an appendix, didn't lend itself to a methodical approach?
The policy document, the national guidance.
National guidance.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is now a convenient moment for a break?
Yes, I think it probably is. Well, we have a break in the middle of the afternoon, Mr. Hayward, and I think this is a good time to have it. So we'll stop now and we'll resume at 25 to 4, please. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Thank you, sir.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. 25 to 4, then, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Hayward to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Hayward?
Indeed, thank you, sir.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, I now want to turn to pre-inquest action number 10, which was review of policy number 539 itself. Can we please have a look at the Lindridge review on the screen, where it actually has this here, which is the review itself, action reference 10. That's LFB 3033943. And the entry on the action, page 12, I'm so sorry, page 12. And the action reference is number 10, and the expected outcome, entry on action log, revision of policy 539, emergency call handling. We looked at that before. The expected outcome was to ensure that it complied with national guidance. Now, if we go back to your first witness statement, please, at paragraph 20, first witness statement, page 7, paragraph 20, third bullet up from the bottom of the page, you say, and we want page 7, thank you, you say, action 10, the FSG element of policy note 539, emergency call management, was revised by Lindsay Turner and the OST. So you say that there. Now can we go to your second witness statement? And I'm sorry to jump around. There will be a question coming. But if you go to paragraph 24 of your second statement at page 5, in answer to question 1C, you can see that there. You can see the question. The question is, as to actions 9 and 10, please explain whether you took any role in reviewing and or auditing the work of Lindsay Turner when she revised the operator and supervisor reference information files and the FSG element of PN 539. Please also explain which individuals in the OST were involved. And you say in response to that, in paragraph 24, I did not take an active role in reviewing and or auditing the work of SOM Lindsay Turner when she revised the operator and supervisor RIFs and the FSG element of PN 539. I was not employed as a control officer and had not completed a control officer's course. Nevertheless, I had a high-level understanding of SOM Turner's review. I ensured that I had an overview and understanding of the control functions. When you say that you had a high-level understanding of SOM Turner's review, can you just explain what you mean?
Yeah, so she would have gone through the policy and what changes she'd made to the policy.
Did you review the changes, the
Yes.
substantive changes that she made?
Yep.
You did. And what did you bring to the exercise?
I don't recall.
Right. I mean, you didn't have any expertise or experience of call handling
No.
yourself. So how could you add any value to the exercise she had already carried out?
Well, a comparison to the gap analysis. Obviously, there was me. It would have been the three of us. So Joanne would have been there as well. So it was a critique of the policy to see if it complied.
I see. So your role was was really a documentary exercise to make sure it fitted, and Joanne Smith. You say Joanne Smith helped you with it.
Yes.
I see. And so she could bring the experience and expertise.
Indeed.
Yes, I see. Now let's look at her statement. This is at LFB 00121219, page 14. This is the statement of SOM Smith to the inquiry, paragraph 34. And you can see the question she's answering, question 9. The inquiry understands that you may have been involved in the review of Policy 539 and notes that you updated the Lacknell House Board on the progress of the review at the board meetings on 19th July 2010 and 15th September 2010. Please confirm whether this is correct and set out your involvement in the revision of Policy 539. And she says in the third line, we reviewed PN 539 in light of the gap analysis conducted after the Lacknell House incident. I recall that I would have looked through the policy with Scott Hayward, identifying relevant and non-relevant items and considered where amendments should be made based on our findings in the gap analysis. I think you agree with that, do you?
Yeah, we would have looked at it after the gap analysis to see what was missing. Yes.
Now, you say in your first statement, if we go back to that, please, at page 9. If you look at page 9, paragraph 21.3, you say there that you presented the policy to the Lackland House Board on the 22nd of June 2010. I'm summarising the first bullet point there. Did the board, do you remember, review the amendments or just accept the presentation that you gave them?
I believe at the board they just accepted the presentation that was given. They had access to the 539, so they may have looked at it later, but I can't confirm whether they did that or not.
Right. You say they just accepted the presentation that was given. My question is, did you actually give them a presentation?
I don't know, and that's it was presented 539. It was updated. They have access to that policy because it's a brigade policy. Right.
Perhaps let's just look at the board minute just to square this away. It's at LFB 000555208. We can just look at that. And you can see the first page of that document. We looked at it earlier. You can see that you were present. And if we go within that document, please, to page 3, paragraph 8.5, you can see that it says Policy 539 is being reviewed to include recent changes to call handling, such as persons shut in lift policy and AFA policy. Changes have also been made to Appendix A, Fire Survival Guidance, to better reflect FSC 10/93. Now, it doesn't record a presentation being made to the meeting. Is it right? Can we take it from this that what was said is no more than what is recorded there?
No, I would. I mean, a presentation would normally be a verbal update as opposed to a PowerPoint or a whiteboard. The meetings were, it wasn't for that. So yes, you can, as it's read there.
Right. I mean, you say in your first statement of paragraph 21.4, we don't need to go to it necessarily unless you want to, that SOM Smith presented on the review of PN 539 at the meeting on the 19th of July, the following month, 2010. Do you remember whether the board actually looked at the amendments or just accepted the presentation that she gave?
I don't recall.
You don't remember. Do you remember whether amendments were approved at that meeting? That's 19th of July 2010.
I'm not sure whether they were approved. They would have probably been accepted, but again, they wouldn't have sat there. It was quite a meaty document, although the amendments would have been made predominantly to Appendix 1. So in time, they would have reviewed it and brought back any feedback, had there been any, but I don't recall.
And what about Assistant Commissioner Brown? Did he have any role in the process of amending Policy 539 or presenting that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can we then turn to pre-inquest action 13? And the subject of that is the letter, or proposed letter, to the DCLG relating to the gaps found in national guidance themselves. Can we start then with the Lindridge review again, back to that, LFB 3033943, page 13. This is action 13, and it says, expected outcome, clarification of national guidance with a consistent approach followed by all FRSs. Review process findings, and this is obviously at January 2013. This action will not be complete until the control report is accepted to ensure all issues are included. Were the clarifications that's referred to there, were those the clarifications identified in the gap analysis that we looked at earlier? For example, pages 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Yes, I believe they were.
And did you write the first draft of the letter that was going to be sent?
Yeah, myself and Joanne Smith did.
You did. Let's look at that. LFB 404728. There is the letter addressed to Sir Ken Knight, who is the CFRA, dated the 3rd of February 2012. That's the document of which you were the author with Joanne Smith, I think.
Yes.
Do you know what steps were taken after 3rd of February 2012 to progress this letter to a state where it could be sent?
No. This was submitted to the board for signature by the Commissioner. The Deputy Commissioner at the time, Rita Dexter, she suggested that the letters held until the control report is published. And then after that, I had no knowledge. The letter was there. I had no knowledge of what happened after. And I was later told by AC Brown that it wasn't sent.
Right, that is...
And I don't know what the reason is.
You don't? Right, let me just see if I can explore that a little bit further with you, and if you can't help me, then
Okay.
You can't help me. Let's start with paragraph 21.4 of your first statement, page 9, where you refer to the letter being delayed pending the submission of what you call the control report, the November 2012 control report.
Yes.
My first question is, do you know when the decision was made to delay sending that?
No. Once it was submitted, I believe I gave it to DAC Tim Cutbill, and then it went to the board and through legal. It then sat with the Deputy Commissioner for the Commissioner's signature, and that was the last time I got involved in the letter.
And why was it delayed for the submission of the control report?
I don't know. There was no explanation given at the time. They just wanted to wait until the control report was published.
Right. And you go on in paragraph 21.9 at page 10, next page of your statement, to say this. In November 2011, this is the third line. In November 2011, I requested permission from the board for the letter to the DCLG to be sent, and then the then Deputy Commissioner Rita Dexter asked that it be deferred to the next board meeting. Then, on 12th December 2011, the Commissioner confirmed that the letter should be sent and that I was to provide the letter to the Commissioner for signing, which I recall doing. I do not know whether this letter was eventually sent or why that might have been. If we go to the minutes for the Lacknell House board meeting on the 19th of November 2012, which is LFB 30084046, we can see from those minutes, first of all, that you were not there. Let's wait for them to come up. This is the Lacknell board meeting, 19th November 2012. You're not there, you send apologies.
Yep.
If you go to the foot of page 1, you can see action plan 6.1, action 13, draft letter to CLG on FSG. This letter will no longer be sent. Do you remember being told that at the time?
No. I was told by AC Brown that it wasn't sent, not that it was no longer to be, well, same difference.
Right, so
I was informed.
You were informed. Did
Yeah.
you ask why it wasn't being sent?
Yeah, and there was no answer given.
You said there was no answer given. Who did you ask?
AC Brown.
And what did he say?
He said there was no reason given.
Right. Did you make any representations the next time you attended the Lacknell House board?
No,
Why is that?
because a decision had been made by the Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner that the letter was not to be sent. So
Let's go to it. LFB 3040033. This is a meeting that you did attend,
Yep.
14th December 2012, and we can see that you're there. You're the penultimate entry on the list of attendees. And if we go to page 2, please, paragraph 6.1, action 13. Draft letter to CLG on FSG. This letter will not be sent and will be reviewed after the inquest has concluded. See that?
yes,
Very foot of the screen.
yep.
Was there any discussion at that meeting of that topic?
No, all I recall was the last information I got on it was the fact that the letter would be sent after the control report, and obviously now I wasn't aware of this,
Right.
so I don't recall it happening.
Did you say anything, do you think? I mean, after all, you spent a lot of time and trouble writing the draft.
Indeed, but no, the decision was made by the Commissioner, and that was that.
Was it? Did you regard it as not your place to ask her? For
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Right. Do you know if it was ever reviewed after the inquest concluded?
No, not that I'm aware of. I was never told that it was sent and it sort of, that was it.
Right.
So no.
Were you concerned, or to your knowledge, anybody else concerned, that this letter, which had identified defects or gaps in the national guidance shown up by your gap analysis, was now not going to be sent?
It was a concern, but the view was that we shared our training with FRSs that wanted to use it. Yes, there was concern, but we felt that the training packages that were or improved reflected what needed to be done.
And if we go back to the Lindred Review, LFB 3033943, please, page 4. This is in fact action 5, not 13, but nonetheless, we've seen it before, but we'll come back to it now. On page 5, you can see key findings. Action 5, National Control Guidance versus LFB Control Policy Gap Analysis. And we read before the fact that the gap analysis did not include FSC 5404. We looked at that together earlier, Mr. Hayward. Can you help us with which recommendations for improvement in the national guidance have not been reflected in the local policy, as the second paragraph there says?
I can't without any more detail, I'm afraid.
Do you remember whether you took any action to remedy the issue that had been identified?
If it was raised there, I would have thought so, but I really can't recall.
Let's turn next to pre-inquest action 14, which is the exchange of information between control and the incident ground. And that's essentially policy number 790, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Can we go next to SOM Smith's witness statement, please, at LFB 00121219, paragraph 69 on page 26. And she is answering the question at the top of the page in relation to action 14, creation of policy 790. The question 15, the inquiry understands that you were involved in the development of policy 790 with Patrick Utting. Please confirm whether this is correct and set out the nature of your involvement. And she says this at paragraph 69. I had some involvement in the development of PN 790 with Patrick Utting after the Lacknell House fire. I reviewed PN 790 from a control perspective to ensure that the words and descriptions were accurate. I also recommended that a change of advice given to residents in high-rise buildings could occur and needed to be included in the policy. This work was carried out in 2011 before I was seconded to the CFOA. PN 790 was not at that time a shared policy between operational firefighters and control. Did you ask SOM Smith to carry out that work on PN 790?
I do not recall, but probably.
If it weren't you, who was it?
It would have been AC Brown.
Do you know why you asked her to do that work, or AC Brown asked her to do that work?
Well, it was because policy 790 was about communicating with the control room, so we needed an input to talk about procedures, the current procedures that control use for passing information. And of course, at that time, whilst we pass information to the fireground, we didn't necessarily get information back unless asked. So the idea of this policy was to establish that two-way communication. So it would make sense that a control officer would need to be involved in the creation of the policy.
Did you give SOM Smith any direction as to the intended purpose of policy number 790?
No, I didn't.
Did you give her any direction as to what control needed to achieve from it?
No, because at the time it was established as an operational document originally. And we were going in there from a control perspective. I suppose that as it was being developed, it changed a little bit to show that there will be more control involvement.
Right. What was your
Sorry
involvement?
to interrupt you, Mr. Millett. Can I just ask this? This reference to a shared policy suggests that there was a fairly widespread distinction between operational policies and control room policies, as if the two were completely unrelated parts. Is that how it was, or?
Predominantly, sir, yeah. There was operational policies which dealt with operational firefighting, and there was control room policies which dealt specifically with control room issues. And there, so when we got on board with this policy, this was probably one of the first shared documents that we had.
You'd think it might have been a candidate for being drafted by a team from one of each.
Well, Patrick Utting was an operational officer,
yes,
and obviously Joanne was a control officer. So that's how the policy was being put together. So,
right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, Mr.
What was your involvement in the development of PN 790?
Just feedback from Joanne about how the policy was developing.
Did you have any role in supervising the actual drafting?
No, that was done by Patrick Utting and Joanne.
And now, as you have seen, and as the chairman has just asked you about, she says that this was a shared policy between operational firefighters and control.
She says it was not a shared policy.
Sorry, it was not at that time a shared policy between operational firefighters and control. Can we please go to LFB 401257? This is the version of PN 790 issued on the 23rd of February 2012. And you can see that is the case, reviewed as current then on the 17th of April 2014. Owned by the Head of Incident Command Policy and Operations Review Team. You can see that.
Yes.
What was your understanding of who the policy was being developed for?
For operational staff predominantly, but it was obviously for them to be able to do that it needs a control input. So it was a shared document, but the actual document was written for operational staff to be able to communicate back to the control room.
Right. So directed at operational staff rather than directed at or shared with control room personnel.
Directed at. I mean, it was shared with control. Because obviously
Right.
we needed to understand it to be able to do the communication.
Was there any discussion at the time that it was being developed that it should be a shared policy, as between operations and control?
Not that I recall.
Given the role that the control room plays in an FSG call, did you yourself consider that it should be a shared policy?
Yes, but I don't recall.
Did you ever make any representations to that effect?
No, this policy, as I said, this policy was written not in control. So Joanne would go to headquarters and do the work over there. So it didn't actually come to us until the document was almost completed.
Right, so she was in effect seconded, it's not quite the right word, but she was parachuted into operations. Yes.
Yes.
And did she ever raise with you that approach, making it essentially, well, predominantly, your word, an operational policy, might create a problem?
I don't recall. I mean, we were very, very. We wanted it to happen.
Can we go to LFB 3033266, please? Now, this is an email chain in February 2011, and if we look at the bottom of the chain, we go to the last email in the chain, you can see that here is Pat Utting sending all assistant commissioners and Joanne Stibbards-Smith and indeed others the attached draft policy regarding fire survival guidance calls. You can see that from the addressees and the first paragraph. You see that. And then he says, could you refer to it to your appropriate teams as required? and then wants observations by Saturday, 26th of February to 2011. And if you go up the chain to page 1, look at the bottom email on page 1, you can see that Dave Brown forwards this on to you.
Yep.
And Joe Stibbards and Lindsay Turner asking the question, you are presumably already happy with this as you have inputted into it? Question. Had you, in fact, provided any input into it, as AC Brown seems to have thought?
Yes, we as controllers, not me specifically,
Right.
but we as the senior managers would have done.
And were you, by that stage, happy with it?
Yeah, I believe we were.
If we then move into April 2011, LFB 000-33332, and go to the bottom email on that, in that document. This is an email of the 13th of April 2011 from Michelle, is it Kunica, to Pat Utting. Subject draft 155, fire survival guidance call. Now, in fact, it's right, isn't it? The draft 155 was the working title.
Yes, it was.
For PN 790.
Yes.
And Michelle Kunica says, well, just as she was an operational policy coordinator at the time, wasn't she?
She was.
And she says, or she asks, she says, please find attached draft operational procedure for fire survival guidance call. Please provide any comments or feedback you care to offer on this draft to myself on or before Wednesday, 4th of May. Please also assess the impact of this new procedure on your department and advise what, if any, activities / further work will need to be undertaken before this procedure is implemented. For example, does this new procedure require change, such as current training provision, service delivery resources, or future strategic planning? Did AC Brown ever ask you to carry out the task of assessing the impact of this new procedure on control, and, for example, what training provision might be required as had been requested?
I don't recall him asking me that.
Did you carry out that task?
We would have carried out to see what the impacts would be, yes.
And if we go to the top of that chain, you can see there's an email from Dave Brown on the 14th of April 2014 to Danny Cotton and others, Tim Chidgey, Dominic Ellis, Ian Hughes, asking for comments. Did anything arise out of that?
Not that I recall.
Right. And I then want to ask you about something that happened a little bit later in 2011, namely the Haygate Challenge in June 2011. Do you remember something called the Haygate Challenge in the summer of 2011?
No.
You have no recollection of it? Let's see how far we go with the contemporaneous documents then in light of that. But let's start with LFB 3033345. This is an email run at the bottom of page 1, of which we can see an email from Andrew Rowe, 8th of May 2011, to a group, starting with Pat Utting, but including a number of other people, including in the last line of the addressees there, Joanne Stibbards,
yep.
and finally you. You see
yep.
that? And the subject was a high-rise policy test exercise, June 16th, 2011. And in the second paragraph, just above the bottom of your screen, it says, as you are aware, the aim of the exercise is to test the proposed amendments to the current high-rise policy and the new fire survival guidance policy. As a result, we've briefed all the crews playing part on the proposed changes and have supplied the draft documents to them to study before the exercise so that they can implement any new procedures. And if we scroll further down to page 2 of the email, if you go on, you can see that you and SOM Smith, middle of the screen there, bottom of your screen,
yep.
apologies, middle of the page, are to be control observers / facilitators. Yes?
Yep.
See that? And then if you go to the top of page 3, Andrew Rowe says this: the exercise is a wet drill situated in a derelict high-rise block in Southwark. Control are running a background exercise for their staff, so this will be run as a live incident on ProCAD with a dedicated airwave channel, a live control room, including an officer of the watch and control operators dedicated to the exercise. MDT will be live, as will CSS. We know MDT is mobile data terminal,
Yes.
and CSS is the command systems, isn't it? Did you have any involvement yourself in the planning of that exercise?
Yeah, only in the fact to set up the control and to ensure that. So yes, it was an exercise, and they allocated specific pumping appliances to that incident. So the prep for control was to make sure those appliances were released for off ProCAD, and we can mobilise them from ProCAD. So there were some system changes needed to be done, and also we had obviously allocated people to take part in the exercise. And I believe we put a couple of control officers down there to observe training as well.
So you had control officers on the ground?
I believe so, yeah. Just to go and to witness it.
Right. When he says a live control room, was that Merton?
It is in 2011.
Yes.
So no, it would have been Isle of Dogs.
Right. But nonetheless,
It was the control room, yeah.
A proper control room rather
Yes,
than
I believe so.
a get-up.
Yes.
Now, when it says controller running a background exercise for their staff, what did that mean in this context?
Well, we're just obviously looking at PN 790, looking at our other policies, and running an FSG exercise in the background.
Did you give any training to your staff in advance of this exercise, so that they would be familiar with PN 790 and know what to do during the exercise, so that you could assess them?
I don't recall, but if we were testing PN 790, then they'd have had a copy of PN 790 with them.
A copy of the policy?
Yeah.
Right, but was there any time given to them to read the policy and become familiar with it?
I don't recall, but I would suggest yes.
Right. And was there any training done on PN 790 in order for them to be able to operate it properly and give the exercise value?
I can't recall.
Can we then look at LFB 000566628? This is the meeting minutes of the 16th of June by way of the debrief. Haygate Estate high-rise exercise debrief meeting minutes. Now, did you and SOM Smith attend that debriefing, do you think?
Yes, I believe we did.
And if we go to page 4, you can see under subject 2, item 2, third bullet point down, it says unknown. This is under, I should tell you, subject to, as the top of the screen says, draft fire survival guidance calls policy draft 155. That's as it became 790. And then 2 is information gathering, and the third bullet point down, unknown. The whole FSG recording was hard enough to manage with 4 flats. It would be almost impossible should you have 60 flats involved. Can this information not be sent to the MDT? Now, looking at that, is it right that the exercise only involved 4 FSG calls?
I'm not sure.
Well, let's just see if we can nail that down further. Can we look at the at page 11 of this document? And that may be a misreference. Let me show you something slightly different. LFB 000333884. LFB 000333884, page 11. Now this is the feedback report, and item 7 is recording of information, and the first bullet point says, do you see, it says
yes.
Consensus and specific feedback from the CUs was that even with only 4 FSG calls, the CU staff riding as only 2 could not deal with the workload associated with the FSG policy and their normal duties. So does that help you with your recollection that Haygate only involved 4 FSG calls?
Yes.
Did you or SOM Smith have any input into deciding that number?
What, the 4 FSG?
That there should be 4 as opposed to 3 or
No.
6? No. Can you help us with why only 4 FSG calls were selected for this exercise when at Lacanau there were 5?
I don't recall exactly, but we never expected to do anything more than between 2 and 5 FSG calls. I mean that's multiple FSG. So I suppose I think it was more about testing the communications as opposed to the amount of FSG calls that were coming in.
But would the amount of FSG calls coming in not be a critical thing to test?
Yes, I'm
sure. To work out what your limits
were. But this was the first exercise. I just wanted to test the policy itself and then get the feedback, which is what they've done here.
Was there a later exercise proposed where you would increase the number of FSG calls?
Not that I recall.
Why was that?
I don't know. I mean, we did, or stations did organise exercises and ask for control input, which sometimes we could support and sometimes we couldn't. But I couldn't tie down whether they were all FSG or whether we did any more FSGs than that.
Now, going back to the debrief meeting, you could see from that the concept of a large number of FSG calls, possibly 60 flats, was being discussed at that meeting. Is that right?
There was a big issue about command units only being staffed by 2 operational staff, and the amount of information that they have to collate and display would mean that doing this type of recording would severely deplete their ability to do much else. So it was raised on the evening of the debrief. And that was for something that they took away. I don't know what action happened after that. And they were looking at increasing the command unit.
Right.
But that's as far as I know.
Right, but my question is a slightly different one, or getting at something slightly different, which is that the concept of 60 flats, or FSG calls coming from 60 flats, which we've seen referred to in the debrief, was that discussed as a realistic possibility?
No, not at the time, because that never experienced an incident of 60 flats before.
Nonetheless, was that not something that was being considered as something that control should plan for?
Not at the time, no.
Was it also your experience of the exercise that it was hard to manage with 4 FSG calls and verging on the impossible if you had more flats involved?
It's difficult, because if you've got 4 simultaneous fire survival calls, you're potentially taking up 8 members of staff. So yes, it is difficult, which is why we worked within that remit of between 2 and 5 as a multiple. We haven't experienced anything more than that at that point.
Does that tell us that the limits of your FSG training and the numbers of FSG calls for training purposes was predicated on the number of call handlers and supervisors available to deal with them?
In its purest form, then yes, I suppose it would be. Sorry. Just to add to that, simultaneous calls. So if they're all coming in at the same time, then yes, that would be an issue. But previous experience has shown that sometimes FSG calls, we have one in it to stop and another one to come in which case it's more manageable.
Yes, it's about concurrence rather than sheer numbers.
Yeah.
I accept that. I see that entirely. But did you give any feedback yourself to that meeting? From the control room's perspective?
I don't recall. I don't know if I put anything in the notes.
I want just to examine this question of large numbers of FSGs a little bit more closely with you. We've seen that policy number 790 was published in February 2012. When it was published, did you familiarise yourself with its content? I
read through it, yeah.
Yes. And if we look at the version in force on the night of the Grenfell Tower fire, that's the version reviewed as at 17th of April 2014. It is at LFB 401257. If you look at that, there's the date on it. Can I take it that you were also familiar with this revision from the time that it was revised in April 2014?
I don't recall, but yes.
Right. If we look at page 2, paragraph 1.1, it says this. The purpose of this policy is to explain what a fire survival guidance FSG call is and to describe how critical information should be exchanged between brigade control and the incident ground. It provides guidance on how this information is to be recorded for use by incident commanders, IC. Would you agree that in part the policy dictated the actions that control staff should take in the event of receiving a fire survival guidance call?
With regards to exchange information between the fire ground, then yes.
And it was it to work in conjunction with PN 539, emergency call handling?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is about the communication exchange, and 539 Appendix 1 is about fire survival guidance calls. So it would work hand in hand to pass that information to the fire ground, yes.
Yes. Yes. And if we go to page 3 and look together at paragraph 5.13, at the foot of the screen it says, if, underlined, control has sufficient resources, then M2FH FLON Ops 1 could be used to free up the main scheme fire link radio if there are a large number of FSG calls. Did you ever ask, well, did you know, first of all, what large number of FSG calls meant or was contemplated there?
We based it on Lacanau, so it was based on five being, a multiple incident.
Right. And then if you go to page 5 at paragraph 8.7, it says, in exceptional circumstances, an IC may consider informing control that their advice to FSG callers should be altered, e.g. to attempt to leave their property. The IC should remember that this advice may be contrary to national policy for control staff on FSGs, and liaison with the officer in charge at control will be required for agreement to change the prescriptive advice. Did you, when you reviewed this draft, or perhaps at an earlier stage, consider that also might need to work the other way round, that control staff could provide information to help inform any decision by the incident commander as to whether and to what extent the stay put policy or advice should be revoked?
No.
Why is that?
Because we take control take their direction from the fire ground. So resourcing or anything is dictated by the IC. The control room was not a command and control function, it was a service delivery function.
Yes, but did it not nonetheless occur to you that there might be things within the control room that the incident commander couldn't see or know, and which might impact on whether stay put should be revoked, and that therefore the control room should be ready to provide information to the incident commander that would bear on that potential decision?
If there is information pertinent to the incident ground, then we would try and pass that information, but not. I don't recall in this situation having been told that or doing that.
No. And does it follow from that you at least gave no thought to whether control room operators and their supervisors needed to be given any guidance, whether in Policy 790 or anywhere else, about what information they should be gathering and passing on to the incident commander so as to assist them with the decision as to whether to revoke stay put or not? Well,
I mean, the information that control passed to the fire ground is about fire survivor guidance calls. That's what they do. Regarding anything more like fire spread, for example, they're not the experts to provide that sort of information. That's what operational firefighters do, and hence we take our direction from them.
But I think you would accept this much, that it might be the case that because of what is being fed into the control room through fire survival guidance calls or ordinary callers, perhaps callers from outside, it might be something that the incident commander themselves could not see, and therefore that might be relevant for them to know.
Potentially, and Grenfell aside, that information would get passed down to the fire ground if there's information that's pertinent. But of course, you need people to be listening on the other end and the like. So, yes, I agree.
Yes. Did you ever consider how a CRO would go about giving advice to a caller in the situation where the incident commander had changed the stay put advice?
No, it was not. It was not considered in training or discussed openly that's something that we would do.
Given what is said in 8.7 here on the screen, although there may be exceptional circumstances, why was it that no training was ever given to CROs about what advice to give where, in those exceptional circumstances, an incident commander told control that stay put should be revoked and everybody should leave?
Because as a brigade, that was something that we didn't expect ever to happen. So there was no training at any level, I don't think, about how that would play out.
You say as a brigade that was something we didn't expect ever to happen, but on the face of the policy, they were circumstances which might arise, although perhaps exceptionally.
Again, I go back to the point that the command and control is on the fire ground and not in control, and we would wait, to see if the fire ground come back and says there's a change, then we would respond to that, not necessarily the other way around. And I'm not sure that control staff they're certainly not trained or qualified to make that sort of decision at that point.
No, but my question to you is, why do you say that it was as a brigade, it was something you didn't expect ever to happen when this policy itself expressly contemplates that it might, albeit exceptionally?
But because up to that point it hadn't happened then. I mean, I can't answer the question. I understand what you're saying, but I can't. The expectation was that would never happen, and it hadn't happened to date, and therefore we went no further with it at that point.
Now, in respect of training on PN 790 for control staff, can we look at your third statement, please? That's at LFB 00121176. And if we go to page 6 in that, you say, at paragraph 21, you say this. And this is under, or in the answer to the question, which presentation either referred to in your witness statement or otherwise delivered the training on policy 790 to control room staff? That's the question. And the answer at 21 is, to the best of my recollection, there was not a formal presentation which delivered the training on policy note 790, PN 790. Instead, I believe on-watch training involved an AOM discussing the policy note with those who were attending the familiarisation training, which could be one-to-one sessions at desks or group sessions in an area of the control room. So is it right, looking at that training was really more of an informal discussion?
No, it would have been training or familiarisation. They were familiarising themselves with a policy. So it wouldn't have been a 2-hour session necessarily. It would have been talking through the policy and making sure that staff understood it. That's how I recollect it being done.
You refer to something called the familiarisation training. Can we just go back to the bottom of page 6 where you see that phrase? I'm afraid the two words straddle the pages. Discussing the policy note with those who were attending the familiarisation training. What was the familiarisation training?
Oh, to familiarise ourselves with the document with PN 790.
Why was there no formal training on policy number 790 arranged for control staff, given the policy's application to CROs in FSG calls?
I do not recall.
Why didn't you yourself personally ensure that they were given formal training?
I don't recall.
Was the training that you do describe here, the one-to-one sessions at desks or group sessions in an area of the control room, ever recorded anywhere on the training database or in your manual spreadsheets that you kept?
I believe there is some training recorded in the spreadsheet.
Right. We haven't seen it anywhere in any of the FSG training records.
Okay.
Where might you have seen it, do you think?
I thought I may have seen it on the spreadsheet, but I may be wrong.
Right. Does that take us to this conclusion, that there was no, you can't, as you sit here today, point to any system whereby the brigade could make sure that all control staff had been given even the training you describe on watch in respect of policy 790?
I can't, if it's not recorded, I can't guarantee you it was done, but I believe it was done because it was a new policy coming into control.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, we're going to move to a different subtopic, but it's a slightly lengthier subtopic.
Well, it would be sensible to stop at that point.
I think it would. Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, Mr. Hayward, I think we've reached a convenient point to stop for the afternoon. So we'll break there. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come back to answer some more questions tomorrow, but I think you were expecting that.
I was, so yeah.
So we'll do that at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, please. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Of course.
Or anything relating to it while you're away from the room.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I'd like to go to the usher. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.